What is there to see in downtown Rochester, New York? Let's find out. Downtown Rochester is centered around the Genesee River. The Genesee River is the reason for Rochester's existence, and it's also the namesake for the Genesee Brewing Company, if you've ever had a nice Genesee cream ale. Both sides of Rochester's Genesee River are nice and vibrant, and this is because the river is really narrow. Some cities are built around really wide rivers where really only one side of the river can be developed into a bustling downtown. With Rochester, both sides are actually pretty developed. The west side has some older, more historic architecture, and the east side has some more modern 20th century architecture. Both sides are worth checking out. The Genesee River also has huge waterfalls. It's not every day that you see waterfalls in the downtown area of a city, but Rochester has that, and it makes for really good scenery. Okay, it's time to hit the streets. We're gonna start with a Welcome to Rochester sign on South Clinton Street. I really like this sign because you get off the highway and you think to yourself, what could possibly be here? And then you see this Welcome to Rochester sign, and suddenly pessimism turns to optimism. Down the street, we have the Strong Museum of Play. This is one of the most famous tourist attractions in Rochester. It's a museum about toys, and there's blocks out in the front. Who doesn't love that? Everybody knows I love buildings. I have to talk about the buildings in downtown Rochester. Rochester had a construction boom in the late 60s, early 70s. The tallest building is called Xerox Tower, built in 1968. It's 443 feet tall, and it's quite magnificent. It's the former headquarters of the Xerox Corporation. They left downtown Rochester, decided they wanted no part of it, so now there's no Xerox inside, but it is still quite a nice building. Down the street, we have a building called the Legacy Tower. It's the second tallest building in Rochester, really beautiful, built in the 1990s for a company called Bausch & Lomb. It used to be called the Bausch & Lomb building. Bausch & Lomb, just like everybody else, decided it was time to leave, went to Connecticut or something. So now it's the Legacy Tower. This is a really nice building. I really like the plaza at the base, and there's also some really cool art right across the street. I just want to pause and list all the companies that were founded in Rochester, because the list is pretty impressive. So we talked about Xerox, Kodak, Bausch & Lomb, which invented Ray-Bans, Western Union, the telegraph giant, French's Mustard, Hell of a Good Mayonnaise, Jell-O. I mean, it's a pretty good list. All right, this is not the Rochester Skyscraper show, but I do have to talk about the Metropolitan. This used to be called the Chase Tower, and guess what? Chase Bank didn't want any part of downtown Rochester, so now it's called the Metropolitan. You can rent apartments in here. I really like the look of this building. If I were living in downtown Rochester, I might live in the Metropolitan. If you ever find yourself in Midtown Rochester, you might see something known as parcel number 5. And if you don't know what it is, you will be very confused. It's just a giant gravel plot of land in the middle of some pretty nice buildings. This is the former site of Midtown Plaza, the first downtown shopping mall in the United States. When it was constructed in 1962, people thought it was really going to revitalize downtown Rochester, and as we know, downtown shopping has done really poorly all throughout the United States. In 2008, this was completely torn down, and Rochester is still deciding what to do with the land. Over here, we have something called the Sibley Tower building. This was once the tallest building in Rochester, believe it or not, when it was built in the late 1800s, I believe. This was at one point an enormous department store. Sibley's was just the department store in Rochester, and Wikipedia kindly mentions that it at one point was the biggest department store between New York and Chicago, which essentially means it was bigger than whatever was in Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Detroit and so on and so forth, but still quite a great honor. Nearby is something called the Liberty Pole. It's a really cool sculpture. It's actually the third one to have been here. The first one was erected in 1846. This current one was built in 1965. Across the street is the Sibley Triangle building. J. Foster Warner constructed the Sibley Triangle building. He and his father, Andrew Jackson Warner, great father-son duo. Best architects coming out of Rochester, in my opinion. We'll see a building by Andrew Jackson Warner in just a little bit. Just down the street is the Eastman School of Music. The Eastman School of Music is consistently ranked in the top 10 best music schools in the US. It's part of the University of Rochester, and they have a really cool theater down here. If you ever get a chance to go inside, I highly recommend it. Right next door is a coffee shop. It's called Java's. My good friend from Rochester has recommended it highly, and I've never been, but I recommend it highly too through her. So on this side of the river, there are also some really nice buildings. I first want to point out this building. This is called First Federal Plaza. And you'll see on the top of the building, there is this circular thing, and it actually used to rotate, and it was a restaurant that rotated. I guess Rochester at one point had enough of a tourism industry, they had a rotating restaurant. That is bizarre to me, but still pretty cool. In the 90s, they shut that down, unfortunately. We've reached something called the Four Corners. We're on East Main Street, by the way. The Four Corners is home to the Powers Building, which was built by Andrew Jackson Warner. That's J. Foster Warner's dad in 1869. On the top, there's this observation tower, which is there solely to maintain status as the tallest building in Rochester. That was an important thing back then, I guess. If we head a couple blocks north, we'll get to the Kodak Tower. The Kodak Tower was built in 1914 in the French Renaissance style, and it was the headquarters for Kodak. Kodak used to be a huge deal in Rochester. It was founded here and headquartered here. Kodak recently filed for bankruptcy. They are not doing well. They're not in Rochester anymore. There's a ton of problems with Kodak, but nonetheless, that building is pretty cool. If we go a little bit south, we're going to run into a bridge. This bridge used to carry a subway. Rochester had a subway from 1927 to 1953, and unfortunately it became unsustainable. Before that, this was an aqueduct that carried the Erie Canal across it. The Genesee River goes north-south, and the Erie Canal had to go east-west, so they just built an aqueduct over it. And the Erie Canal's been rerouted a couple of times, so I think by the early 1900s, the Erie Canal got rerouted, but that bridge was still there. A little bit further down, we have Blue Cross Arena. I just want to point out Blue Cross Arena because a professional basketball team used to play here, the Rochester Royals. They moved and became the Sacramento Kings, where they are today, but the Sacramento Kings actually started out in Rochester. Now, I'm just going to make a disclaimer before I end this video. Rochester is not perfect. I was accosted by 3 different people while I was walking around taking pictures. There is still a lot of work to be done, but there's potential. You should go visit. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please like and subscribe if you got something out of it so I can make more videos.